forced me out of the only home I'd known for nearly 4 decades. At the inheritance meeting, she even flung a cup of coffee toward me and sneered, "Enjoy life on the street?" But when the attorney revealed my true net worth, her confident smile disappeared. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this journey reaches. I never imagined that at 66 I'd be standing on the porch of the house I helped build, clutching a single suitcase while my daughter-in-law Susan tossed my belongings onto the lawn. "You can't do this," I whispered, the cold November air stinging my face. "This is my home too." Susan folded her arms, dressed head to toe in a designer yoga outfit. "Was your home?" she said, every word sharp. "Harold is gone, and I'm not running a boarding house for retirees." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, pretending to water plants or lingering on their steps to catch every detail. "I cared for Harold for 42 years, I said, my voice steadier now. "I raised your husband. I helped raise your children. This house holds my life." Susan let out a cold laugh. "Your life? Let's be honest. Harold supported you. Now that he's gone, I won't." My grandson Tommy appeared, dragging my old rocking chair, the one where I'd soothed his father as a baby. "Where should I put this, Mom?" he asked. "Garage sale pile," Susan replied without a glance at me. "That chair was my mother's. Please," I pleaded. "It's all I have left of her." Susan stepped in front of me, face tight with annoyance. "Everything here belongs to me now. Harold left it to his son, and his son left it to me. You don't get to choose." I reminded her how I'd worked 2 jobs while Harold studied at night, how I'd manage every meal, every doctor's visit, every prescription. None of it mattered. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked quietly. "There's a budget senior community 20 minutes away," she said with a shrug. "Or maybe a long-stay motel until you figure something out." Even my granddaughter Lisa set a box of family photos next to the trash. "Honey," I said, reaching out, "those are pictures of your father, of you and Tommy as babies. Mom says we need to focus on the future," she replied, eyes down. Susan glanced at her watch. "You have until sunset. After that, anything left behind would be donated or tossed out." I looked around at the scattered remnants of my life. Clothes stuffed into trash bags, well-worn books, the ceramic figurines I'd collected over the years. Everything that made me who I was, spread across the lawn like debris after a storm. "Please," I said one more time, "let me stay until I can find a place. I won't be any trouble. I'll stay in the guest room, help with housework." "No," Susan's voice was final. "I've already talked to a realtor. A house this size is too much for me and the kids. We're downsizing. Maybe something with a pool." She was going to sell it. The house where Harold and I brought our newborn son home from the hospital. The house of birthdays, anniversaries, quiet winter mornings. The house where Harold had died in his sleep only 3 weeks ago while I held his hand. A moving truck pulled up, and Susan's face lit with relief. "Perfect timing," she said to the movers. "Everything on the lawn goes to storage unit 47. I'll give you the address." That's when I realized it had all been planned. Susan hadn't decided this morning to push me out. She'd been preparing for it. She'd rented a storage unit, booked the movers, probably lined up the realtor weeks ago. She'd been waiting. As the movers loaded my belongings, I stood there like a ghost watching my own life being erased. Neighbors stared from porches and behind curtains, some shaking their heads, none stepping forward. Mrs. Peterson finally approached, pity in her eyes. "Bessie, honey, if there's anything I can do, she'll be fine," Susan cut in before I could answer. "Bessie's tougher than she looks." "Aren't you, Bessie?" I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I might scream or collapse. When the truck pulled away, Susan handed me a business card. "That's the storage facility. You have 30 days to decide what to do with your things before they start charging fees. 30 days, 66 years of living, reduced to a deadline and a rented unit." As she turned back toward the doorway, my doorway, she paused. "And Bessie, don't come around bothering the kids. They need stability, not reminders of sad old times." The door closed with a finality that echoed in my chest. I stood on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand. watching the lights come on in the windows of the house that had been moonlit. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I broke down. These were not quiet, dignified tears, but desperate sobs that shook my entire body. I had nowhere to go, no one to call, and less than $300 left in my account, but Susan's words kept circling in my head. What have you contributed lately? If only she knew the truth about what I'd really given over the years. If only she knew the secret I'd kept, even from Harold himself. She was about to learn that underestimating Bessie Morrison was the biggest mistake of her life. The Sunset Motel was never a place I pictured myself living. The carpet was worn, the walls thin, the air a mix of cigarettes and disinfectant. But it was all I could afford on my Social Security check, and the manager kindly offered a weekly rate after I explained my situation. 3 weeks passed. I was learning what it meant to be invisible. At the grocery store, cashiers looked through me as they scanned my discounted items. At the laundromat, younger people brushed past like I wasn't there. Even at the senior center where I sometimes ate the free lunch, I sat alone while the others chatted about grandkids and card games. I called Lisa and Tommy several times, but their phones went straight to voicemail. When I finally reached Lisa, her voice sounded practiced. Mom says we shouldn't get involved in adult problems. She says you'll figure things out and be stronger for it. Adult problems, like being homeless at 66, as if that were some character-building exercise. I drove by the house twice, hoping to catch the kids when Susan wasn't home. The second time, she came storming out, her voice sharp enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. I told you not to come around. The children don't want to see you. You're just confusing them with your drama. Drama. That's what she called it. Now I spent my days in that motel room, watching game shows and stretching every dollar. I'd applied for part-time work, retail, cleaning, anything that would take a woman my age, but nothing had come through. The worst part wasn't the stained carpet or the thin walls. It was the weight of being unseen, a feeling like the world had already decided I no longer mattered. It wasn't even the way the other motel guests looked at me with quiet pity, as if wondering what I'd done to end up there. The hardest part was seeing Susan's life online. I'd never bothered with social media before, but one of the women at the senior center showed me how to find Susan's profile. Every few days she posted cheerful updates, photos of the house with new furniture, plans for renovations, family dinners, where the kids looked happy and well fed. Her caption spoke of fresh starts, focusing on the future, and teaching the children independence and self-reliance. She made it sound as if pushing me out had been some inspiring life lesson for Tommy and Lisa. The comments were worse than the photos. So proud of you for taking charge. The kids look happier already. Amazing how much lighter the house feels without negative energy. Negative energy. That was what nearly 4 decades of holding a family together had been reduced to. I began keeping a notebook, recording memories of Harold and the life we built. I was terrified that if I didn't write them down, those years would vanish, erased by the way Susan spoke as if they'd never happened. But they had happened. I was the one who stayed up all night when Harold Jr. had pneumonia at 7. I drove him to baseball practice twice a week for 6 years. I helped with homework, listened to him practice saxophone, held him when his first girlfriend broke his heart. And where was Harold Jr. now? Susan claimed he was traveling constantly for work, but I hadn't heard from him since the funeral. My own son had disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed. One Thursday afternoon, I sat in the motel parking lot, gathering the courage to face another lonely evening, when a familiar car pulled in. It was Mrs. Henderson, Harold's sister Margaret. For a moment, hope stirred. Maybe someone in the family still cared. Bessie, she said, stepping out. I heard about what happened. Oh, Margaret, I said, standing so quickly I felt lightheaded. I'm so glad to see you. But her expression wasn't worn. She looked uneasy, as if she were there out of duty rather than kindness. I wanted to talk about Harold's things, she said. Susan mentioned you took some items that belonged to the family. My heart sank. I only took what was mine. My clothes, personal items. I left everything else. Susan says you took Harold's watch. The one that belonged to our father. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Harold gave me that watch for our 20th anniversary. He said he wanted me to have something to remember his father by. Margaret shook her head. That watch should stay in the family, Bessie. It should go to Harold Jr., or maybe to Tommy one day. I am family, I said, though the word sounded thin even to me. We're family, she corrected gently. Harold's gone now, and Susan is the children's mother. She's the one making decisions. I stared at her. This woman who had shared holidays and birthdays with me for over 40 years. In her eyes, I saw the same quiet dismissal I'd felt from everyone else. I was no longer part of the family. I was just a leftover from Harold's first life. Fine, I whispered. I'll give her the watch. Margaret looked relieved. I think that's best. Susan also mentioned some jewelry that might have belonged to Harold's mother. Maybe we can go through your things together and make sure everything goes to the right place. The right place? Not with me, apparently. We spent an hour in my small motel room, sorting through the few possessions I had left. Margaret took Harold's watch, his mother's pearl earrings, even a small ceramic vase that had been a wedding gift from Harold's aunt. You understand, don't you? She said, packing them into a box. These pieces have sentimental value to the family. I nodded, though inside I wanted to shout that they held just as much meaning for me. I was the one who had polished that watch every week for 26 years, worn those earrings to every important family event, carefully packed and unpacked that vase through 3 different moves. After Margaret left, I sat on the bed and looked at what remained. A few changes of clothes, some toiletries, a handful of photographs Susan hadn't bothered to throw away. That was all I had to show for 66 years of living. I picked up a wedding photo of Harold and me, both of us so young, so full of hope. I remembered the way he'd whispered, I love you, as we danced our first song, the way his mother cried happy tears, the way his father told me I was perfect for his son. Now Harold was gone, his parents were gone, and I was a stranger living in a motel, unwelcome in the family I'd helped build. That night, I called the storage facility to check on my things. The woman on the phone sounded brisk and detached. Your 30 days are almost up, Mrs. Morrison. If you don't make arrangements for payment, you'll have to dispose of the items. Dispose of them, like garbage. How much to keep the unit for another month? I asked. $150 plus late fees. I had $87 left. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before she could reply. I lay on the hard motel bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. Just 3 months earlier, I'd been Harold Morrison's wife, living in a beautiful house, surrounded by family, respected in my community. Now I was nobody, with nothing and nowhere to go. My hand drifted to the small locket around my neck, the one piece of jewelry I'd hidden from Margaret's careful eyes. Inside was a photograph of my mother, and wrapped around it, something no one else knew existed, a safety deposit box key. Tomorrow I would open that box for the first time in 20 years. Susan Morrison was about to discover just how badly she'd underestimated me. The First National Bank looked exactly as it had decades ago. Marble floors gleaming, ceilings high enough to echo every footstep. I sat in the waiting area clutching my purse so tightly. My knuckles ached while a young banker verified my identity and retrieved the box I hadn't touched since 1983. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it all, if the box would be empty, if the young woman I'd once been had dreamed the whole thing. But when the heavy door swung open, everything was just as I'd left it. Stacks of papers wrapped in plastic, stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements from accounts Harold had never known about. Beneath it all lay a thick leather journal where I had recorded every transaction, every investment, every careful step I'd taken to build something of my own. I opened to the first page, written in the neat handwriting of my younger self. January 15th, 1963. Harold thinks I'm taking sewing lessons on Tuesday evenings. Instead, I'm working as a bookkeeper for Mrs. Patterson's dress shop, $15 a week. It's not much, but it's mine. The memories came rushing back. The fear, the secrecy, the quiet determination. Harold wasn't cruel, but he was a man of his time. He believed a husband provided and a wife kept the home. When I once suggested a part-time job, His wounded look stopped me cold. "Are you saying I can't take care of my family?" he'd asked, and I dropped the subject. But I never forgot the terror of his 3-month unemployment in 1962, when we survived only on savings and small loans from my father. I lay awake at night, afraid we'd lose everything. That was when I vowed to create a safety net of my own. I started small, bookkeeping at Mrs. Patterson's shop, claiming I was learning to sew. Later, weekend inventory work at a hardware store, pretending I was visiting my sister. Every dollar went into a separate account Harold knew nothing about. Turning the pages of the journal, I saw the steady climb of my hidden wealth. By 1965, I'd bought a modest duplex in a rundown part of town. The rent covered the mortgage. Harold never questioned the extra grocery money. He thought I was simply thrifty. By 1970, I owned 3 rental properties. By 1975, I was investing in stocks, spending sewing circle evenings at the library, teaching myself to read financial statements, while Harold believed I was studying recipes. "You're so lucky, Bessie," he used to say. "You never have to worry about finances. You can just make our home beautiful." He never knew that. While he fretted over his salary and pension, I was quietly building a portfolio that would have astonished him. A soft cough broke my reverie. "Mrs. Morrison, is everything all right?" the banker asked politely. "Yes," I said, forcing a calm smile. "Could I have some time alone with the box, please?" When he left, I pulled out the most recent statements, the ones I'd avoided since Harold's death. I'd been so focused on playing the grieving widow that I'd almost forgotten the financial empire I'd spent 40 years creating. The numbers on the statements almost made me dizzy. My stock portfolio, quietly managed under the name B. Morrison, was worth $2.3 million. The real estate holdings, 8 properties spread across the city, were valued at $3.1 million. Add in the small companies I'd quietly invested in, and my total net worth came to $8.7 million. $8.7 million, more than Harold earned in his entire career. More than Susan would ever see, even if she spent every penny of Harold's modest insurance policy and pension, and she'd toss me out as if I were nothing. I thought of the past 3 weeks, sleepless nights in that dingy motel, free lunches at the senior center, Margaret's pitying eyes as she carried off the few belongings I had left, while I'd secretly been a multimillionaire. Why had I hidden it so long? At first it was to protect Harold's pride. He truly believed a husband should provide and a wife should stay home, and I loved him too much to make him feel small. Later it became habit, a private part of me I couldn't give up. And if I'm honest, there was a quiet thrill in knowing that, in a world expecting me to be helpless, I was quietly powerful. The secrecy had its cost. Harold never knew to leave me anything in his will, so everything had gone to his son, and from there, to Susan. She had no idea that the real fortune belonged to the woman she'd thrown out like yesterday's mail. I pulled out my phone and called my broker, Patricia, who had known me for 15 years but never met me face to face. "Mrs. Morrison," she said warmly, "I was so sorry to hear about your husband." "I sent flowers to the funeral home. Did you receive them?" "Thank you, Patricia." "They were beautiful," I paused. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to liquidate some of my holdings." "I need quick access to cash." "How much are we talking about?" I pictured Susan's smug smile as she tossed my belongings on the lawn. $2 million to start," I said evenly. "I have a purchase in mind." Patricia hesitated only a second. "That's significant, but we can structure it to be tax efficient." "May I ask what you're planning?" "I'm buying a house," I replied, a real smile tugging at my lips. "A very specific house." After hanging up, I stayed in the vault another hour, savoring every page of proof that my careful decades had paid off. A small tech company I'd backed in the early 90s was now worth more than our original home. A commercial property I'd bought on a hunch had tripled in value when the city built a shopping center next door. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, stronger. No longer the helpless widow everyone pitied, but Bessie Morrison, the woman who had quietly built an empire while the world thought she was just a housewife. At the public library that afternoon, I pulled property records and real estate listings. By the time I left, I had my plan. Susan thought she'd won when she kicked me out. She believed she'd cleared her path to an inheritance and secured her children's future. She had no idea the dead weight she'd discarded was about to buy the ground right out from under her. The next morning, I called the realtor handling Susan's sale. "I'm interested in the property on Willow Lane," I said. "I see it's listed at $485,000. I'd like to make a cash offer, no contingencies. I can close in 2 weeks." The realtor's excitement came through the phone. "That's wonderful. What price did you have in mind?" I pictured Susan's face when she'd called me a burden, when she told the neighbors I couldn't care for myself. $550,000, I said. $65,000 over asking, cash. It was finally time for Susan to realize she'd underestimated the wrong woman. Her realtor must have called around noon on Friday, because at 12:47 p.m., my phone lit up with the number I'd blocked weeks ago. When I didn't answer, the calls came again and again, 7 times in 10 minutes, before she switched to text. "Who is trying to buy my house?" "Bessie, I know this is you. Call me right now or I'm calling the police." I set the phone aside and kept packing. After 3 weeks in the Sunset Motel, I was moving into a small furnished apartment downtown. Nothing glamorous, but clean and respectable, especially after I paid 6 months' rent in cash. The property manager's attitude had changed the instant I handed him an envelope instead of a credit application. The phone buzzed again, a voicemail from Harold Jr., the first I'd heard from my own son since the funeral. "Mom, Susan says someone's offering way over asking for the house. She thinks you're involved, which is crazy. She's really upset and the kids are confused. Can you call her and clear it up?" I almost laughed. Even my own son couldn't imagine I had that kind of money. To him, I was still the helpless widow living off his father's pension. Instead of calling back, I drove to the real estate office to meet Susan's agent, Janet, a cheerful woman with no idea she was in the middle of a family standoff. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, frowning slightly as she checked the paperwork. "I'm sorry, but you have the same last name as the seller." "Are you related?" "I'm Harold Morrison's widow," I said simply. "The house belonged to my late husband." Her brow furrowed. "Oh my, I think there may be some confusion. Mrs. Susan Morrison is selling the property. She inherited it from her late husband." "That would be my son," I explained calmly. "He inherited it from my husband, his father. But of course, Susan is free to sell it. I'm simply interested in purchasing it as an investment property." The lie slid out easily. I'd had 40 years of practice keeping the truth to myself. "Well," Janet said after a pause, "your offer is certainly attractive." Mrs. Morrison, Susan, was hoping to get the asking price. 50,000 over is quite generous. "May I ask why this house in particular interests you?" I offered a small, polite smile. "It holds sentimental value." By Monday morning, Janet called to say Susan had accepted. Apparently, she'd also demanded to know who the buyer was, and when Janet explained it was Harold Morrison's widow, there had been, as Janet put it, quite a reaction. "She seemed very surprised what told," Janet said carefully. "She asked me to verify your financial information several times." I assured her the cash offer is legitimate and that we can close whenever you're ready. I could only imagine Susan's face. In her mind, I was living on Social Security, surviving week to week. The thought that I could buy a $500,000 house outright must have seemed impossible. On Tuesday, I decided to enjoy myself a little. I drove to the house while Susan was at her boutique job. Tommy was at school, but Lisa was home with a cold. Through the window, I saw her curled on the couch watching TV. I knocked gently. She answered in her pajamas, surprised and a little nervous. "Grandma Bessie? I know your mom's not here," I said softly. "I just wanted to check on you. Your Aunt Margaret mentioned you weren't feeling well." Lisa nodded but didn't invite me in. "I'm okay. Just staying home from school. Are you eating enough?" "Taking your vitamins?" I asked. I reached into my purse and handed her a $20 bill. "Here. Have your mom order you some soup for lunch. Chicken noodle is the best when you're sick." Lisa stared at the bill like it was something strange. "Grandma, where did you get this?" The question cut straight through me. In her mind, $20 was so suspicious, it needed an explanation. "I've been managing my money carefully," I said. "Take it and order something healthy." She accepted it, still looking puzzled. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom said you're in a motel and couldn't afford to keep Grandpa's things. Your mother was mistaken about a lot. I answered gently. I'm doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. I could see the gears turning. Are you getting help from someone? Mom says the government sometimes helps. People who can't take care of themselves. So that was how Susan had described me to my own granddaughter. Lisa, I've always been able to take care of myself, I said softly, and I've been taking care of others for a long time. Sometimes adults don't really see what's going on, even when they think they do. She nodded, not fully convinced. Should I tell Mom you stopped by? Should I tell her about the money? You can tell her whatever you want, sweetheart. That evening, Susan called, and this time I picked up. What are you trying to pull, Bessie? No hello, no courtesy. I'm not pulling anything. I heard you were selling the house. I'm interested in buying it. With what money? Her suspicion crackled through the phone. You're in a motel. You couldn't even keep Harold's things in storage. I found a way to get financing, I said evenly. Sometimes things work out better than expected. What kind of financing? Who would loan you that much? The panic in her voice gave her away. She was used to controlling every variable. The idea that I had resources she didn't know about terrified her. It's a private loan, I said, from someone who believes in me. Why is she? I want to know who's giving you this money and why. Susan, I don't owe you the details of my finances. You want to sell? I want to buy. Simple business. There's nothing simple about this, she snapped. You're trying to manipulate me. Make me look bad. I'm trying to purchase a house I'd like to own. Nothing more. Silence stretched. When she spoke again, her voice had cooled. Even if you scrape together the cash, what makes you think I'll let you have it? I can withdraw my acceptance. You could, I agreed. But you already signed the purchase agreement, and Janet tells me you've put down deposits and booked movers. Backing out would be costly. Another pause. You've been planning this, haven't you? The helpless widow act. It was all a show. I never said I was helpless, Susan. You just decided I was... Where's the money coming from, Bessie? You didn't have it when Harold died. Did you mortgage something? Sell family property? She was grasping for any story that fit her narrow picture of me. The money is mine, I said. It always has been. That's impossible. Harold supported you your entire marriage. You never worked. You never contributed. You couldn't have that kind of money unless you took it. Heat rose in my chest, the same burn I'd felt when she threw my life onto the lawn. You don't know anything about my contributions, Susan, I said quietly. You don't know me at all. I know enough, she snapped, and I'll figure out the rest. She hung up. I set the phone down and surveyed my new apartment. In a way, she was right. I had been planning this, not as revenge, but as protection. I just never imagined I'd need protection from my own family. The next morning, Janet called. Mrs. Morrison, I have unusual news. The seller wants additional documentation, bank statements, verification letters, proof beyond the normal proof of funds. For a cash deal? I asked lightly. That's not standard. Very unusual, Janet admitted. She mentioned family disputes and wanting everything to be beyond question. Tell Susan she can have whatever documentation she needs, I said. Set a meeting for Friday morning. I'll bring it all. Are you sure? You're not required. I'm sure. It's time to clear a few things up. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Susan thought she was about to unmask me. She had no idea what she was about to see. Susan wanted proof that I was running some kind of scheme. Instead, she was about to discover the truth that the helpless widow she'd mocked was wealthier than she could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. The law office of Henderson and Associates occupied one of those old downtown buildings with towering ceilings and dark wood meant to convey gravitas. I arrived 15 minutes early in the navy dress I'd worn to Harold's funeral, the only formal outfit Susan hadn't thrown away. Susan was already seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, a stack of papers in front of her. She'd brought backup, Harold Jr. in a rumpled dress shirt, and Margaret wearing the same disapproving look she'd worn when she took Harold's watch from my motel room. Bessie, Margaret said with a tight smile, I'm surprised to see you here. Are you? I set down my purse and took a seat across from them. Susan requested this meeting to review my financial documentation. I assumed the whole family would want to be involved. Susan's attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Mrs. Morrison, the elder Mrs. Morrison, I should clarify that this meeting is a bit irregular. My client has concerns about the source of funds for your house purchase and requests verification of your capacity. Of course. I opened a folder thick with bank statements, investment reports, and property records, and spread them across the table. Here are statements from my primary accounts. You'll see I have more than enough liquid assets to cover the purchase without financing. Harold Jr. leaned forward, squinting. Mom, these numbers, they can't be real. Susan snatched the papers, her face paling as she scanned the balances. These are fake. They have to be. They're not, I said evenly. Mr. Henderson, you're welcome to verify everything with the institutions directly. The lawyer nodded. That's standard for transactions of this size. This size? Susan's voice rose. What size? I placed another set of documents on the table. My investment portfolio. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all managed by Patricia Williams at Meridian Financial. You can call her yourself. Margaret's hands trembled as she picked up a statement. Bessie, this says you have over $2 million in stocks alone. $2.3 million as of last week, I corrected. The market's been kind. Harold Jr. stared at me as if I were a stranger. Mom, where did all this come from? Dad never mentioned anything like this. Your father didn't know, I said simply. The room fell silent. Susan flipped through pages, her expression shifting from shock to anger. Impossible. Harold supported you your entire marriage. You never worked. You never had access to this kind of money. I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather journal I'd kept hidden for 40 years. Actually, I worked quite a bit. I just didn't tell Harold. I opened to the first page and read aloud. January 15th, 1963. Harold thinks I'm taking sewing lessons on Tuesday evenings. Instead, I'm working as a bookkeeper for Mrs. Patterson's dress shop. $15 a week. Susan yanked the journal from my hands. This is ridiculous. You're making this up. Keep reading, I said. March 1965. Use savings to purchase duplex on Elm Street. Rent from both units, covers mortgage with $300 left over monthly. Margaret shook her head slowly. Bessie, if this is true, why keep it secret for so long? Because Harold wouldn't have understood, I replied. He was a good man, but a man of his time. He needed to believe he was the provider. If he'd known I was building wealth, it would have wounded his pride. Harold Jr. flipped through more papers. Mom, some of these properties, I recognize the addresses. That duplex on Elm Street, you still own it? I own 8 rental properties, I said calmly, plus commercial real estate, and I'm a silent partner in several small businesses. Susan slammed her hand on the table, making everyone jump. You're telling me that while Harold worked himself to death at the insurance company, worrying about college funds and retirement, you were sitting on millions? I was building security for our family, I said firmly. Your father never had to worry about money, because I made sure we'd always have enough. By lying to him, by deceiving your own husband, by protecting him, I answered. When he had his first heart attack and couldn't work for 6 months, the extra income meant we never missed a payment. His disability insurance covered 60% of his salary. The rest came from my rental income. The room went silent again, the weight of 4 decades of hidden work settling over everyone like a storm. The truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket. For 40 years, you all believed Harold was the sole foundation of this family, I said quietly. No one ever questioned where the extra money came from when times were tight. How we always had enough for emergencies and unexpected expenses. Susan's hand shook as she rifled through my records. Even if this is real, even if you somehow hid millions from your own husband, it doesn't change anything. Harold left everything to his son, and Harold Jr. left everything to me. That's the legal inheritance. You're absolutely right, I replied evenly. Harold's assets went to Harold Jr., and his assets went to you. But my assets belong to me. Margaret looked uncertain. Bessie, surely some of this money came from Harold's income over the years. The lawyer interjected before I could answer. If Mrs. Morrison built this wealth independently, using income her husband never knew about, the law would treat it as separate property. Susan's face turned scarlet. This is insane. You can't be married to someone for 42 years and keep millions of dollars hidden. I can, I said. And I did. Every Tuesday, when I said I was at Sewing Circle, I was working for bookkeeping clients. or checking on properties. Every Saturday, I claimed to be shopping with friends. I was meeting contractors or tenants. Every great grocery bargain came from rental income covering our expenses. Harold Jr. looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Even after Dad died, I hesitated, feeling the weight of decades of silence. Because I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing to give. The room went still. Susan's voice dropped to a whisper. You let me throw you out. You let me humiliate you in front of the neighborhood. You watched me struggle with the house payments and the kids' expenses, and you said nothing. I watched you celebrate getting rid of me. I corrected. I watched you post about your fresh start and how relieved you were to clear out the so-called negative energy. I watched you tell my grandchildren I was too old and useless to matter. Harold Jr. buried his face in his hands. Oh God, Mom, what have we done? Susan shot to her feet, chair scraping the floor. No, I won't let you turn this around. You deceived everyone. You lied to your own family for decades. I protected my family for decades, I said, standing to meet her eyes. But that family is gone now. Harold is gone. And you made it clear I'm not welcome in whatever new version you're building. I pulled a thick envelope from my purse and set it on the table. Mr. Henderson, these are the documents for the house purchase. Cash, $65,000 over asking. Please schedule the closing as soon as possible. Susan's face went white. You can't do this. I can do whatever I choose with my money, just as you did with Harold's, I replied, calmly gathering my papers. Susan's voice cracked as I walked toward the door. This isn't over, Bessie. I'll fight this. I'll prove that money isn't really yours. I turned back. I have 40 years of documentation for every dollar, every investment, and witnesses to confirm it all. What do you have? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. That's what I thought, I said softly. Enjoy the rest of your fresh start. I left the conference room to the sound of Susan's choked sobs, rage and disbelief, not grief. She'd built her future on the idea that Harold's estate was the only wealth that mattered. She never imagined the woman she'd thrown out like trash was worth more than everything she thought she'd inherited. 3 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of 412 Maple Street, my house now, as a moving truck pulled away. Susan had fought the sale to the last hour, hiring lawyers, demanding investigations, even claiming I'd coerced Harold Jr. into letting me buy at below market value. None of it mattered. Every document I provided was airtight. And buying the house? That was only the beginning of what I had planned. Every document had been checked and verified. Every deed authentic, every bank statement beyond question. After 40 years of quiet planning, my finances were untouchable. The house looked different now that it was mine again. Not because Susan had painted the living room or changed the curtains, but because I was finally seeing it as my own, bought outright with money I alone had earned. I walked through each room slowly, noticing the upgrades she'd made with borrowed funds she could never repay. My phone buzzed. Patricia, my financial advisor, had texted. House closing confirmed. Funds transferred. By the way, Susan's agent called asking about your other properties. I told her we don't discuss client details. I smiled. Susan was still digging for weaknesses that didn't exist. Another message followed, this one from Harold Jr. Mom, can we talk? I'm still trying to process everything. I feel like I don't know who you are anymore. That one made my chest tighten. Rebuilding with my son would take time, if it was even possible. But first, there was one last piece of business. I drove to Sunset Gardens, the modest apartment complex where Susan had moved after losing the house. It was clean and safe, a step above the motel she'd once imagined for me. I climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, my knees reminding me that wealth doesn't erase age. Susan opened the door after a long pause. She looked worn, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, eyes red from either tears or sleepless nights. Moving boxes lined the walls behind her. What do you want? She asked flatly, not inviting me in. I wanted to see how you're settling in. She gave a bitter laugh. Settling in? I'm drowning. The credit cards I used to fix up the house are maxed out. The moving costs ate the last of Harold's insurance. I can barely afford this place. and they're already talking about raising the rent. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Or are you here to gloat? I looked past her to where Lisa and Tommy sat on a second-hand couch. They gave me small, uncertain waves. I waved back. I'm here to make you an offer, I said. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of offer? I own several rental properties. One of them is a 3-bedroom house about 10 minutes from the kids' school. The current tenants are moving out next month. The rent would be $400 a month. Susan blinked. $400? That's impossible. A house like that rents for triple. Not my house. Not for you. She stared at me, clearly searching for the trap. Why would you do that? Because Lisa and Tommy are my grandchildren. They shouldn't have to suffer because of choices made by adults. Poor decisions? Her voice rose. You're the one who lied to everyone for 40 years. You're the one who let me humiliate you when you could have stopped it. You're right, I said calmly. I could have stopped it. I could have told you about my money the day you threw me out. I could have written a check for Harold's funeral expenses, or helped with the kids' college funds, or the house repairs. But I didn't. Susan's tears streaked her makeup. Then why? Because I needed to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing. I needed to know whether the woman my son married would show kindness to a widow she believed was penniless, or discard her the moment she became inconvenient. Silence filled the space between us. And now you know, Susan said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Now I know, I agreed. I pulled a lease agreement from my purse. The offer stands. $400 a month, utilities included, month to month. You can leave any time. No catch, just one condition. You don't speak ill of me to the children. Whatever issues exist between us, stay between us. Susan took the papers with trembling hands, still searching my face for hidden motives, and found none. Every statement had been verified, every deed confirmed. My finances were beyond dispute. The house felt different now that it was mine again. Not the place where I'd once lived at Harold's allowance, but a home I had bought outright with my own wealth. I walked through each room, noticing the paint Susan had chosen, the curtains she'd hung, the fixtures she'd updated on borrowed money she could never repay. A text arrived from Patricia, my advisor. House closing confirmed. Funds transferred. And for the record, Susan's agent called asking about your other properties. I told her we don't share client details. Another message followed, this one from Harold Jr. Mom, can we talk? I'm still trying to process everything. I feel like I don't know who you are anymore. That message tightened my chest. Rebuilding with my son would take time, if it was even possible. But before I could focus on that, I had one last stop. At Sunset Gardens, where Susan had moved after the sale, I climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. She opened the door slowly. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed. Boxes were stacked behind her like a barricade. What do you want? She asked flatly. I came to see how you're settling in. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Settling in? I'm drowning. The credit cards I used to fix up the house are maxed. The moving costs ate what was left of Harold's insurance. I can barely afford this place, and rent's going up next year. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Or are you here to gloat? I glanced past her to Lisa and Tommy on a thrift store couch. They gave me small waves. I'm here to make you an offer, I said. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of offer? I own several rental properties. One is a 3-bedroom house near the kids' school. The tenants are leaving next month. You could rent it for $400 a month. She blinked. 400? That's impossible. Houses like that rent for triple. Not my house. Not for you. Suspicion flickered across her face. Why would you do that? Because Lisa and Tommy are my grandchildren. They shouldn't suffer because of adult choices. Poor decisions, her voice rose. You're the one who hid millions. You let me throw you out when you could have stopped it. You're right, I said evenly. I could have told you everything. I could have written a check for Harold's funeral, or helped with the kids' college funds, or any of the problems you faced. But I didn't. Tears streaked her cheeks. Then why? Because I needed to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing. I needed to know whether the woman my son married would show kindness to a widow she believed was penniless, or discard her the moment she became inconvenient. She was silent for a long time. And now you know, she whispered. Now I know, I pulled a lease agreement from my purse. $400 a month, utilities included, month to month. No catch, just one condition. You don't badmouth me to the children. Whatever issues we have stay between us. Susan nodded slowly. And I get a job. A real job. Something stable. You're offering a way to get back on my feet, not a free ride. That's right, I said. She studied the papers, voice shaking. Bessie, after everything I said to you? Why? For Lisa and Tommy, I answered. And maybe a little for Harold Jr. when he's ready to understand. Holding on to anger would just be another kind of prison. I've lived in enough prisons. Susan signed with trembling hands. Before I left, she touched my arm. Do you think we could start over? Not like before, but something new? I met her eyes. I don't know. But for the children's sake, we can try. 6 months later, I was in the garden behind the house that was truly mine when Lisa and Tommy ran across the yard. Susan kept her word, working steadily as an administrative assistant and taking pride in her independence. Grandma Bessie, Lisa called. Mom says you're taking us school shopping tomorrow. If that's what you'd like, I said, setting down my pruning shears. Tommy looked up at me with Harold's eyes. Grandma, is it true you're really rich? I'm comfortable, sweetheart, I said with a smile. But Mom says you could buy anything you want. Having money doesn't mean buying everything. It means having the freedom to choose what matters. What matters to you? Lisa asked. I looked at those two beautiful children, proof that our fractured family was slowly healing, and thought of Harold Jr., who had finally called to ask me to lunch. I thought of Susan, working hard not just at her job, but at becoming someone new. Family, I said, but the kind that loves you for exactly who you are. As the children ran off to play, I sat back and watched the sunlight touch the house that had seen so much pain and secrecy, but was now full of life. For the first time in 40 years, I was exactly who I appeared to be. Bessie Morrison, a woman of means and of substance, living well on her own terms with the people who truly deserved her love. Now I'm curious about you, listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you faced something like this yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like more surprising true life stories, 2 more favorites are waiting on the final screen. Thank you for staying with me to the end.